Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be able to share some of the latest science on both DHA and choline and their implications for developing brain and for cognition throughout the lifespan. I also want to acknowledge that support for my preparing this presentation, but that's the extent of the sponsorship, has come from Vita Choline, who are indeed a manufacturer of choline. And the invitation came from their hearing a presentation I gave at Food Matters Live last year. Now, the overview this time, DHA and choline, I'm going to give a brief overview of the basics of each of these nutrients, looking at their importance in early life, and also the issue of recommended dietary intakes versus actual dietary intakes. Then a bit more of the basic science behind why it is that we need both of these nutrients for a healthy brain and the building of that brain in early life. But the highlight really of this presentation is that I'm going to be including some new findings from human clinical trials involving supplementation of mothers at the end of pregnancy and early in the breastfeeding period. And I'm going to finish with the implications for policy and practice from this overview of the latest science. Now, I must start by just acknowledging that mental ill health, brain disorders, as they are known, and problems with cognition, these are now the biggest contributors to the global burden of ill health. So the more we can find out about what we can do nutritionally to prevent and to manage these conditions, the better. Now, we were warned because the pioneer in the field of omega-3 and DHA is the most important omega-3 in brain, Professor Michael Crawford. I want to pay tribute to. His 90th birthday celebrations had to be done online recently. Happy birthday, Michael. But he warned back in the 1970s that if we didn't do something about nutrition, and particularly the nutrition of the mother, that brain disorders will be next. And here we are, 50 years later, with exactly what he predicted. Now, the cost of cognitive and emotional regulation problems is just immense. It is unaffordable. But I want to flag early, and this is my own field of research, that a lack of omega-3 of the long chain variety found in fish and seafood, and particularly DHA, this is implicated in almost all of these brain disorders. But the focus of this presentation is more on choline, because deficiencies of choline may be at least as important but are far less well recognized than the omega-3 issues. So let's look then at why it is we need DHA and choline in early life. Firstly, the essentiality of DHA. I always need to include this. DHA is a dietary essential. Although humans do have a pathway for converting short-chain omega-3 from plant-based foods into some of the longer chain, the biologically important omega-3, EPA and DHA, that conversion, although there's some, it varies between individuals for the usual, some genetic factors, many diet and lifestyle factors, but that conversion is insufficient. It is absolutely the case. It's been the consensus for more than 10 years and recognized by most policymakers too. We must have DHA pre-formed in the diet. Now, it is indispensable. It's the most abundant omega-3 in the brain. It plays a key structural role in membranes. And it's important for building brains in the first place, the development of neurons, their migration, the formation of synapses, and the plasticity of the brain throughout life is influenced by DHA and its availability. So we need it for the growth, the connectivity, and also for the protection of brain and nerve cells. It's a raw material for synthesizing a lot of regulatory molecules, including some highly specialized anti-inflammatory and neuroprotective substances. The problem is that over recent decades, if not centuries, we have very dramatically changed the content of the human diet. The hunter-gatherer type diet, there was roughly a 1-to-1 ratio of the two main families of essential fats, the omega-3 and 6, but the dietary shifts, predominantly more vegetable oils, which increase omega-6, and some omega-6, the long chain, biologically important, are found preformed in meat and dairy. Reductions in fish and seafood have dramatically changed that ratio of omega-6 to 3. So we have an absolute excess of 6 and a relative deficiency of 3 in most modern Western type diets. Now, this was all done without really the recognition or the knowledge that 60% of the brain is fat. So the fat content of the diet really matters. About 20% of that brain is the long chain omega-3 and 6, but it's the balance that's critical, and almost all of us do not get enough DHA. We need it, as I've said, for normal membrane structure. It is there in the membrane phospholipids and released together with EPA or omega-6 AA when needed to produce regulatory substances that govern everything from gene expression, inflammation, etc. But we now come to choline, because membrane phospholipids, phosphatidylcholine, is in fact 40 to 50% of membrane phospholipids, and it is this form of phospholipid that is particularly rich in DHA and other long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, like arachidonic of the omega-6 family. So the need for choline is also profound, and it absolutely works with DHA. So for the normal structure of membranes, this determines fluidity, cell signaling, and DHA is particularly found at synapses. It's also the case that DHA status affects the functioning of all neurotransmitter systems. So dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, and acetylcholine, as well as others. These are all influenced by membrane fluidity, but also the second messenger signaling and other functions of DHA. But again, we have synergy. Choline is not just needed there in the membranes with DHA, but it's needed also to deliver DHA into brain and nerve cell membranes, because the transport of fats, I won't go into details here, but it's a highly specialized thing. And choline is also needed as a precursor to acetylcholine, a very important neurotransmitter, which I shall mention again shortly. So we need omega-3 then in membranes, but we also need it to support healthy brain development. So in early life, and that's very much the focus of this presentation, maternal nutrition and the lifelong effects of that, it's the most abundant omega-3 in brain. Its derivatives affect growth, connectivity, and plasticity. And during pregnancy, there is preferential uptake of DHA and the long-chain omega-6 arachidonic acid in preference to the short-chain omega-3 and 6 found in vegetable oils and plant-based sources. And DHA is also found in breast milk, and the importance of this in infant formula has been the subject of a lot of research. Now, choline plays similarly critical roles in every one of these aspects of early brain development. It too is preferentially transferred from mother to the developing baby in utero, and it too is found in human breast milk. It is an essential nutrient for developing a healthy brain. We need omega-3 DHA uniquely for vision and some aspects of neural functioning. 30 to 50% of the retina should be DHA. And I want to emphasize here, nothing else can substitute, because without DHA, when the body is forced to fall back on the next best thing, it's an omega-6 fatty acid, same chain length, It lacks just one double bond, but it absolutely cannot do the job. You get an almost abolition of retinal signaling. And also, I want to make the link that Michael Crawford was aware of from the off. This is really the evolution of the human brain. DHA has been conserved for 600 million years as the only molecule that can convert a signal of light into electricity. And the development of a visual system and then brains, the very first creatures, very early in evolution, that were able to detect light, they were using DHA to do it. Now, choline is another one that has got an ancient evolutionary history, and it's because these things work. We need them, and other things can't substitute. So a lack of DHA in early life, it affects brain development and connectivity. This is a dramatic illustration of a 50% reduction in synapses from a lack of DHA in the mother. And choline, again, influences neuronal growth and connectivity and synapse formation. So again, we need the both. We also need them throughout life. Cognition throughout the lifespan depends on an adequate supply of all brain nutrients. And as I've emphasized, a lot of the importance of DHA is because of substances we make from it. And choline is equally multifunctional and works across the lifespan. So let's look then at some of the key things that make choline indispensable. As I've said, it's there in membranes with DHA. We need it for myelin formation. We need it to develop the brain. It is the substrate for acetylcholine, which is an incredibly important neurotransmitter. It's the primary one for the parasympathetic nervous system and important for aspects of muscular control and cognition. Choline is also a major methyl donor, so one carbon metabolism, so the methionine and folate cycles, energy production, and like DHA, it has profound effects on gene expression and regulation. It's also critical for the transport of fatty acids and not just lipids, but cholesterol and other things around the body. Now, the first evidence that choline really, because we make some choline ourselves, the liver can manufacture some, but the first absolute evidence that choline, demonstration that this was essential, came in the early 90s from a randomized controlled trial, strictly controlling the diet, and choline deficiency for just 3 weeks. And this was choline deficiency. There was a dramatic reduction in plasma choline and a significant increase in an enzyme in the liver that basically tells you you've got liver damage, because the metabolism of lipids is, as I say, a major aspect of what choline does for us, and they're so important all over the body. So choline, again, multifunctional. It's needed in membranes for brain development, for energy metabolism, and for gene expression and regulation. And in very early brain development, it and its metabolites play numerous roles. The synthesis of membranes, the building of every cell in the body and brain of that baby, the manufacture of acetylcholine, and through its importance as a methyl donor, its importance in gene expression and regulation. So let's look at the intakes and the recommendations. With DHA, 3/4 of Europe does not even get the dietary recommendation. In the UK, it's much the same. And the US, mean intakes, again, very, very suboptimal. Now, particular groups are at risk, and one of those is pregnant women, but infants, children, adolescents also. So these critical stages of brain development, and in the case of pregnancy, development of the baby's brain with lifelong implications, all of those, we don't get enough DHA. Now, the European recommendation, I also want to flag, is pretty low compared with that of other scientific authorities over the years. Blood data back it up that worldwide, quite frankly, almost no one gets enough DHA for optimal brain building and brain function. Now, with choline, adequate intakes is the best we have because of the remarkable lack of data But since '98, credit must go to the US Institute of Medicine, they did set adequate intakes based on that study I've just shown of the liver damage that happens pretty quickly, within 3 weeks. And they set their adequate intakes based on that. So like many of our dietary reference intakes, setting it at a bare minimum for preventing actual damage is what we've got. Europe took until 2016 and their adequate intakes are even lower, based on, oh well, let's look at what people do consume and that must be all right because we think we're all fairly healthy. I'll reserve judgment on my real thoughts on that. The true need for choline during high demand states, and particularly pregnancy and in certain subpopulations, is far greater. I'm going to say it is far greater, because I'm about to show you the research. But in terms of what most people get, even relative to this pretty low adequate intake, most people don't get anywhere near it, including more than 9 out of 10 women in pregnancy. This is true across the lifespan for men and for women at any age. Intakes of choline fall short of this bare minimum to prevent actual fatty liver, let alone the other functions of choline. And the research I'm going to be presenting very shortly, the team at Cornell University have been doing human clinical trials. They've identified that in pregnant women, there is potentially a huge choline gap because their clinical trials have shown long-term benefits for the cognition of the infants from giving twice the daily reference intake, and even the placebo group got more than 90% of women do usually in pregnancy. So this is a remarkable set of findings. There are, of course, individual differences in the need for choline, genetic factors, sex, because estrogen does improve choline synthesis. That's one of the factors. It ramps up in pregnancy. There are other ages and stages, any time that the brain is developing, or particularly plastic, or may need support, such as in later life, from loss or low intakes. We've really got to pay far more attention to the importance of nutrition for brain maintenance as well as development, and the intake of other nutrients, particularly the B vitamins, as I'm going to illustrate. Now, the one-carbon metabolism, etc., if we greatly simplify, a lack of B vitamins, folate, B12, B6, B2, may increase the need for choline and vice versa. And I also want to flag in the lipid metabolism and omega-3 synergies, there are 2 pathways for making membrane phosphatidylcholine, and it is this one, the phosphatidylethanol methyltransferase pathway. That is the one that produces DHA-rich phospholipids, choline-rich as well, and they're packaged by the liver into very low-density lipoproteins, and it is this packaging that allows easy transport both into the brain and to the unborn baby. Now, our dietary sources of choline, they're almost all from animal foods, and the low intakes can partly be explained by the increased popularity of plant-based diets and the fact that very few people these days eat enough liver and eggs or seafood for traditional sources. But we need these things lifelong for building a healthy brain and one that's capable of supporting cognitive function and mental health for life. Nutritional programming is the name given to the importance of epigenetic factors, environmental factors, rather than genes, which in fact are now known to account for really only about 1/5 of the variation in later life. And preconception is when we really should be starting to look at the nutritional needs. Because we do already know, and here are some of the data from DHA, that maternal nutrition, it has lifelong effects. The fetal origins of adult disease paradigm applies to the brain as well as the body. So we know from epidemiological studies that a lack of omega-3 DHA in early life does predict poorer outcomes. This is birth cohort study data following through to 8 years. And from clinical trials, we know that a lack of EPA DHA is a major contributor to prematurity and low birth weight. And that's definitive evidence from systematic reviews of controlled trials. We also know the mechanisms, and they are many and varied and quite scary, because for brain development and plasticity, as well as lipid metabolism and blood sugar regulation, what we're looking at is increased risks in the next generation, documented in the animal studies of anxiety, depression, all kinds of cognitive disabilities, as well as the better known physical conditions that go with them, metabolic syndrome, obesity, and heart disease. Now, as I say, this getting of omega-3 into the brain, DHA accumulates rapidly, and a lack of it, as shown in some congenital neurological syndromes, is profoundly disabling, and in fact fatal if you can't make any DHA, as in cell babies. But choline is needed to deliver it. And to just walk you through this pathway, it is actually this phosphatidyl-ethanolamine methyltransferase pathway that produces the DHA-rich phospholipids packaged into VLDL. That's what's required to get it over to baby. So we need choline and we need DHA. Estrogen, as I've said, will help ramp up this production, but of course you need DHA in the diet as well as the choline to help get it to the brain. So how can extra choline help improve pregnancy outcomes? Well, we've known a lot about this for some decades. Higher intakes in pregnancy are associated with a reduction in the chances of neural tube defects. Now, those, of course, folic acid is the thing that people associate with neural tube defects. But we know the mechanisms here as well. High maternal homocysteine raises the risks for a host of negative pregnancy outcomes, and choline helps to reduce homocysteine. And here's just a chart showing that the higher the choline, the lower the neural tube defect risk in her baby. Now, interestingly, it's low plasma choline rather than low plasma folate that correlates best with the incidence of neural tube disorders. And this really illustrates that choline is actually the major donor of those methyl groups, while to some extent you can think of folate and B12 as the carriers of that. Now, in animal studies, again, an abundance of evidence that if you supplement the mothers with extra choline, you get long-term effects on memory. Now, this is just the classic visuospatial memory task set for animals, but it was very striking the moment these studies started coming through, again, some time ago, that if you give the mothers extra choline, you get lifelong benefits to cognition, not just short term. And it was this that laid the foundation for the human clinical trials that I'm about to show you. Again, the neuroscience behind it, the hippocampus, and brain plasticity effects from delivering additional choline in early life. And metabolic imprinting, we're back on this epigenetic influences, because choline availability can permanently alter the functioning of the systems needed for cognition. Now, there's been a lot of course, speculation that, well, is it acetylcholine in particular in those systems? I just want to plant the idea that given what we know about DHA and choline's ability to help get that into the brain, there are alternative interpretations and undoubtedly many different mechanisms. But 30 years of animal studies have absolutely shown the lifelong benefits of extra choline in early life. So let's look now at these human clinical trials, because this, I take my hat off to the Cornell researchers. I know how hard these trials are to do. It was a controlled feeding whereby, very rigorously controlled, the placebo group got the daily reference intake value of choline. And let's remember, that's more than 90% of pregnant women usually get. But the choline supplemented, or the high choline group, because they were both supplemented, got twice that. There was cognitive testing of the infants, and this research has already been published. The recent data are on the 7-year follow-up of the children. Now, these researchers have done a fabulous job because some of the basic science was also done at the same time, looking at both the pregnant women recruited into the treatment study and a control group of non-pregnant women. They absolutely showed with radio labeling that, yep, if you give choline, it increases the activity of this PEMT pathway, which is the one that provides DHA-rich phosphatidylcholine in a form that can get across to the developing baby. And evidence that it is indeed reserved and partitioned for that baby came from the fact that it was the non-pregnant women who showed the increase in their own blood phospholipids. So the metaphor that choline is a taxi that helps deliver this special form of DHA, choline, into brain cell membranes where it's needed. Reduced risks for preeclampsia. They looked at biomarkers here and found them. Supplementation with choline helped. And in some of the early data, published nearly 10 years ago, extramaternal choline reduced the baby's responses to stress. Now, pretty important. We do know that stress resilience in early life does indeed help to predict vulnerability in later life to a host of stress-related diseases. There are, again, plenty of mechanisms here whereby maternal choline and its effects on corticotropin-releasing hormone can indeed help to improve infant stress resilience. Also published were the data back in 2017 on infant processing speed. Now, this alone was very impressive indeed, that over the first year of life, consistently better visual attention was found in the infants of the mothers who got the extra choline, and now the new clinical trial data. Following up those children at 7 years of age showed long-term benefits for cognition in the choline, high choline supplemented mothers. Firstly, in a sustained attention task, sustaining attention over the duration of the task rather than fatiguing and giving up. Solving problems on the first attempt. Again, these are recognized and well-used cognitive assessments. And also executive function, the ability to plan and think about and execute an action. Now, this is nothing short of remarkable to be seeing effects, and particularly in such a small study. I think it shows how incredibly well-designed, well-controlled. It was a controlled feeding study, and they were absolutely rigorous about controlling the diets of the mothers involved. But this is extraordinary, impressive, and really does need to attract some attention. But 7-year follow-up then shows lasting benefits for cognition. We already have a huge body of evidence showing long-term benefits from both choline and DHA. And these data absolutely show, quite frankly, that choline requirements in early life may indeed be double the current adequate intake of 450 milligrams, which most women don't reach. So what do we need to do? We need urgently to address these early life effects of malnutrition on brain function. Now, it is good that the American Medical Association has already recommended, the inclusion of choline in all prenatal vitamins, because most women are not even aware of choline. They might be aware of folic acid, but not choline, and it just hasn't been there in most prenatal supplements. We're still waiting for Europe to give their determination, but I want to draw attention to this excellent paper published in BMJ Nutrition, Prevention and Health last year. We are overlooking a potential choline crisis in the UK. It's critical and essential. Most people don't get enough. And the major dietary sources are these animal foods, eggs, milk, and meat. And what the data show is giving most people what choline they get. So we must get more data on this to allow our regulatory authorities to follow their procedures. But for that, actually, we need the nutrient databases to include more data on choline. And we've got to educate healthcare professionals and consumers about how important a choline-rich diet is and how to achieve that. And if you don't get this from dietary sources, as this excellent review summarised, then supplementation strategies are required, particularly in key stages like pregnancy. Now, one way of improving awareness, I give credit to the researchers in Colorado who they know their stuff, and out came this headline just a few months ago. Extra choline may help pregnant women decrease the negative effects of COVID-19 on their newborns. Now, some of us, and these researchers, have known for years that excessive maternal immune activation in pregnancy raises the risk for a wide range of brain disorders and mental and cognitive problems. And they have simply tracked the maternal immune markers in mothers and come up with the recommendation that, yeah, choline status makes a big difference. So that's one piece of awareness raising. DHA is also needed to resolve inflammation. Mothers need more of that too. But the take-home message is here. Prenatal nutrition is critical. We need both DHA and choline, and we need them throughout life. Choline is needed to get DHA into the brain, sits with it there, and is as multifunctional as DHA in helping to support cognition. And a lack in early life has major implications. So I want to thank and acknowledge the attendee at my talk last year from Vanian, who make phytocholine, who invited me to give this presentation, provided some of the slides and put me in touch with the Cornell researchers. But it is, as I say, lifelong, but we need choline, particularly in early life. And for further information, the charity Food and Behaviour Research, as well as Food Matters Live, will make available copies of slides from this presentation, and we're happy to provide the one from last year. Thank you.